In 1999, one of the Mars satellites had a major issue. There was a mathematical error in the whole system between Lockheed Martin and NASA, causing over $100 million in damages and lost property, I guess, in space. In 1972, in the second image up there, the orbiting astronomical observatory had a major issue as well. At the time, it carried the largest satellite known to man, and it had an explosion in space, and we lost $98.5 million as a result. In 1986, the Challenger disaster halted the space program for 2 years, as many of you guys know, but more importantly, took the lives of 7 astronauts. And finally, SETI, or the Space for Extraterrestrial Life, has been going on for millennia now, with over $100 million invested and more to come. And still, we've not seen traces of life in space. So many times when we look at space exploration and the idea of space, we always focus on the positives. We look at Apollo 11 and landing on the moon. We talk about Voyager 1 and 2. We talk about all the success stories that make us realize who we are as an entire society. But very rarely do we focus on the mishaps and what happens when things go wrong. Today, I'm going to use the F word a lot, and please bear with me. I'm talking, of course, about the word failure. Failure is something that we don't like to talk about, and I get it. It's an uncomfortable topic for the majority of us. Like I said before, in our society, not just in space, but in our culture, we're tended to look at success stories. When a team wins a championship, we celebrate their success, and then we see the documentary of their failures. When we look at quotes online from famous athletes or celebrities, we see what they accomplished, and then hear about their hardships. We never see what happens that goes on behind the scenes. I'll ask you guys this question first. What is your definition of failure? And when was the last time you've experienced it? For some of us in this room, it might be getting an A- or a literal F on a test. For others, it could be a missed assignment at work, or it could be something a bit larger in scope, such as failed relationships, both platonically and romantically, failed relationships with our family, and most of all, failed relationships with ourselves. Earlier this school year, at the very beginning, I challenged myself in a variety of ways. I made a list of everything I wanted to accomplish. Many of these very academic goals, sure, but also very tangible as well. I made what's called a SMART goal, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-consuming, or whatever. And what I found in here is that those things don't work. Like, let's be honest here. We're making this list, and we plan it out, and we have it ingrained in our heads, and we look over it again and again, but when it comes time to actually do it, sometimes it just doesn't go right. I may have had that giant list, and only 35% of it was accomplished by now. And in the moment, which was back in March sometime, I look at this list in disgust, thinking to myself, what went wrong? So much of this stuff I prepared months and months for. I spent hours studying over, preparing for, and yet for some reason, it just didn't come through. And this is something that really stuck with me throughout March, as over time, my social battery died. My entire thought process in my head turned towards negative thoughts, more negative feelings towards my teachers, my fellow peers, my friends, my family, and myself. But over this past spring break, I asked myself this question. What is failure? Not just in the binary term of success and failure, but rather, how do we see it in ourselves? And what can we learn from this going forward? And surprisingly enough, I found this answer in the stars. Now, for some context, I like to stargaze. I'm sure many of you guys have done this before. And imagine a cool, crisp summer day when you're standing out in your patio, maybe around 9:30 when the last guy finished mowing his lawn, maybe when it's not hot enough for insects to bite, but hot enough so you can wear your shorts. And you're looking up, and what do you see? You see a giant cheese block, the moon. You see a flashing light, airplanes. But what else do you see? You see these white dots scattered across a juvenile's canvas known as stars. They all look the same. Sure, we recognize some of them, like the North Star or other more prominent figures in our culture. But for most of us, they look the same. It reminded me of one of my favorite images, where in 1995, Robert Williams of the NASA program challenged the engineers of the Hubble Space Telescope to look at the sky and focus on one particular dark spot. They wanted to look at this little dark spot and ask it for 100 hours, what is there? The engineers thought he was crazy, but this is what they found. A beautiful image of galaxies, stars, planet, maybe even life out there. And it just goes to show that all these stars out there mean something different, and they're not just white dots out there. And for a second, if you would, compare and contrast the idea of what a star is to our experiences. I'm using the word experience because experience is not just defined as success or failure, but experience is something that we go through. Something doesn't have a tangible outcome like my goals did, but rather something that we learn from over time. And here's what I learned. First of all, a star is a very interesting being in itself, something that I could spend hours and hours going over. A star can go through two main life cycles, one depending on its mass. So a low mass star like our sun will go through a long lifetime of billions and billions of years before quietly fading out into the night. Or it can go through a massive event such as a supernova or a black hole or a very dense neutron star, tremendous explosions and stuff in space that we would love to see again and again just because of the fact that it has a higher mass. But we can go even further. We can look at the types of stars out there. For example, you can look at it by the temperature of the star, the color of the star. We can actually have a little famous acronym called "Oh, be a fine girl, kiss me" out there. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. I didn't make that up. We can classify stars like that. Or we can go even further by what's called a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. On this diagram, we can plot temperature on the x-axis and luminosity on the y-axis, and we can see how over time these low-mass stars and high-mass stars interact with each other in such a way that we see everything displayed in front of us. Our sun, as you can see, is somewhere in the middle. It's going on what's called the main sequence, and it will evolve over its lifetime, going through these beautiful cycles of electron degeneration pressure. We can go through gravity contracting the star, all these changes happening until it expands and engulfs the Earth in itself. But we can keep on going a bit further. For example, celestial coordinates in the night sky. How we look at stars from our point of view in the northern or southern hemisphere can be just looked at as just a GPS or a map, and we can give coordinates to every single object out there. Or we can look at what's called the fingerprint of the star. We can look at the spectral lines. We can see what atoms, what elements are being emitted from it, and what's being absorbed. Because at the end of the day, each star is unique in this sense. Carl Sagan once said, "We're made of star stuff." And literally, it's right. We are made of atoms that come from the Big Bang, that come from explosions in this sky. But when I looked at this quote over spring break, I asked myself this question. Yes, we are made of star stuff, but what if we actually are having our experiences too, made just like stars? Many times in school or at home, people say, "You're just like a star." But very rarely does someone say, "A star is just like you." And this whole moment of self-discovery and realizing that we can look for answers not just literally in the sky, but also explore more as well, prompted me to 3 conclusions. 1, analyzing failures and taking responsibility. And all these lessons I learned was really from a scientific understanding of how we approach this. Analyzing failure is something that we can all do. We can all look back, analyze what went wrong. But more importantly, the hardest part for me personally was taking responsibility for it. Realizing that judges might have been wrong. Realizing that scoring might have been off. Realizing that a host of other factors might have contributed to lack of success or perceived success. But the experience, and not just the outcome, but the experience I have, that's something that I can control. Secondly, failure and success are not opposites. Many times in our culture, we see, for example, an NBA team is in win now mode. It's championship or bust. If they don't win, the season's a failure. If they win, it's a success. It's a success. But I want you to think that this is not the case, and think of failure and success as just merely experiences. What one person experiences can be very good, like in a success story. But failure is not the opposite of it. Failure is also not just on the path to success. The path itself has success and failure embedded within it. And finally, keep pushing boundaries and innovating. This year, I don't consider it to be a failure if that means anything at this point anymore, because I knew what my boundaries were, but not just where they were and how much I could get to, but really where I can go from here, how I can push those boundaries, just like any good scientist, and find out where next, where can I keep on pushing myself to better myself as a better person. So, for example, I brought up the four what you might think of space mishaps or failures earlier. Well, the 1999 Mars mission, with a very simple mathematical error, prompted NASA to rethink the way it designs its entire space program by having a very successful Mars program going afterwards. In fact, the 2011 Curiosity rover serves as an example of how much change can really make in the program. In 1972 OAC, that prompted the invention of the Hubble Space Telescope because scientists realized, yes, our biggest telescope in the world failed, but the images it took in the meantime were so powerful that we need to look beyond just the confines of our atmosphere and send a big telescope into space. And we can look at the Rogers Commission that followed the Challenger disaster that had scientists, just like in the examples I provided before, take responsibility for the mishaps, take responsibility for the engineering failures of launching on a cold January day to make sure this doesn't happen. Sure, the 2003 Columbia disaster happened for other engineering reasons, and sure, in 2011, the space program was stopped because of monetary constraints. However, this is probably the best example of how scientists of all people, can look at what happened in a failure in an engineering setting and make it more applicable to our everyday lives. And finally, our pale blue dot. Carl Sagan again called it this. That is Earth, and that's all the life that we know exists at the moment. And it might seem like a sobering fact, but this is all we know. The search for extraterrestrial life is not just a failure because we haven't found anything, it's a testament to who we are as a human species. Think about it. Every single thing we have done throughout our entire existence on this rock has been about exploring what lies beneath us, what's ahead of us, what's in front of us. The search for extraterrestrial life is just the next step in searching for that. So no matter how far we go, no matter how long we look for, it's just in our DNA. I'd like to end with this quote. I found it on Reddit or something like that. But it's a very valid one because it's true. We are in a very precarious point in our existence as people where, sure, we already explored the Earth and we're not going to explore the stars anytime soon with the current technology. But I'd like to add one more line to this. You can fill this blank in any way you want. For some of us, it might be looking into microbiology and looking at the human DNA. For others, it might be a bit more grand into looking at the oceans and mapping the surface floor that we've not yet fully understood yet. But for me, I know the answer, and it's that this is the perfect time to look at ourselves. I myself have gone through this entire experience, this entire journey, to help teach myself one of the most mundane facts of human life, and not just categorizing things by failure or success, but that by rather experience. And at the end of the day, I want you guys to go back to your initial definition of failure, your initial definition of a failed experience, a failed event, something you've not done great in. And ask yourselves, was that really a failure, or was that really a lesson? I know my answer. And at the end of the day, if I could come up with this in 3 days over spring break, if I could really think for a minute over what happened over the past 9 months and really come to these conclusions, I know that anyone else here can do the same. Thank you.